Chapter 7. In its heyday, the Gudian Fun Fair was an enchanting place, and children loved it. The 52-acre walled park, packed with exhilarating rides, sideshows and gaming booths, was in the heart of the city. On weekends and bank holidays, families flocked there, and they couldn't wait to clamber aboard the rides or spend their money in the amusement arcades. The fanfare's designer must have been eccentric, for all the rides were themed as mythological beasts. The centrepiece was Pegasus, a magnificent carousel with fierce-looking winged horses galloping around a giant bird's nest bulging with oversized eggs. Every now and again the eggs hatched, and an ugly troll popped up and squirted the riders with green goo. A favourite with many children was the pedalable pigs. Oversized and brightly painted pink swine seated one child at a time and were operated by foot. The self-propelled go-karts reached tremendous speed, and the riders loved whizzing around the track, trying to bash into one another. The big kipper was the most popular attraction, and always boasted long queues. The enormous yellow fish, standing upright on its tail, towered into the sky, with a transparent tube spiralling down and around its lemon-coloured body. Thrill-seekers climbed a steep internal staircase before jumping into the chute and sliding down on thick mats. The shrieks and elated cries of excitement deafened the onlookers, the hymn of a happy child. For those who were brave enough, there was the Worm of Death, the biggest and most frightening roller coaster anyone had ever experienced. Set up on an immense rickety bamboo scaffold, the track snaked around the fun fair, rising up to terrific heights in some places and plummeting dramatically in others. As the string of two-seater buggies travelled at lightning speed, the framework shook violently and leant dangerously to one side, scaring the occupants witless. In recent times, the fun fair, like so many of the palace-funded institutions in Gud, had been allowed to go to rack and ruin. The rides had become shabby and cried out for a lick of paint. Maintenance was poor, and many of the popular rides frequently broke down. The upshot was that attendance plummeted. The fun fair was no longer fun or fair. It was closed more often than it was open, and when it did open, the entrance fee was extortionate. On the morning after the palace fire, the fun fair was closed, but not quite deserted. An overweight man floundered awkwardly in a rubbish skip. King Guddamac opened his eyes. The sight of a giant fish jutting into the sky was a little disconcerting, but after taking in his surroundings, he knew exactly where he was. As his brain became less fuddled, he saw a man in a green jacket and peaked cap standing in front of him, waving a clipboard and trying to get his attention.
"You are trespassing, and I will have to report you," the man in the green jacket and peaked cap said in a rather nasally tone.
The king tried to sit up, but he was wedged in, with his legs poking helplessly out in front of him.
"What is the meaning of this?" he boomed. "You, man, get me out of this infernal receptacle."
The man in the green jacket and peaked cap did no such thing. He folded his arms with an air of superiority and studied the overweight man.
"You're drunk," he sneered. "I can always tell if someone's been drinking, and you have had a bellyful. I shall be adding your name to my list and informing the Royal Gud of your intoxicated state in a public place." "What are you talking about, you idiot? I am the Royal Gud."
The king thrust out his hand for assistance, but the man just stood there.
"Do you think I was born yesterday, mate? You can't come in here when we're closed and have your own private party. Look at you. You should be ashamed of yourself, dolled up in fancy dress and pretending to be the king. I'm not falling for your nonsense. I think King Guddamac will be very interested to hear about you. He will have you flogged in the market square, I shouldn't wonder. that I will have you flogged if you don't get me out of here, you imbecile."
The man in the green jacket and peaked cap chuckled to himself and picked something up off the ground.
"So, you think you are the king, do you?" "Think? I'm not deluded, you idiot. I am the king."
"Oh, really?"
"Well, you are an excessively ugly man, but nowhere near the grotesque size of the blubbering bulk we have the misfortune to call the King of Gud. And anyway, would you have me believe that the king of our great nation goes about wearing a wooden crown? He would be a rather pathetic king if he did."
The man in the green jacket and peaked cap sneered some more and waved the imitation crown in front of the indignant man stuck in the bin. The Jobsworth was feeling very satisfied with himself and even thought he might get a promotion for reporting the incident. Later that morning, it is interesting to note that the man in the green jacket and peaked cap was not as satisfied with himself any more. He was tied to a post in the market square in front of a large crowd and flogged several times. King Guddamac watched as Mr. Ketch, the lumberjack and town executioner, administered the punishment. Satisfied the culprit had learnt his lesson, the king wearily returned to the palace to determine the fate of his beloved throne room. The palace fire was the talk of the city. Newspapers were full of it, and Splidge and Snotty's quick thinking with the champagne corks made the headlines. The bar at the Hog and Bucket was crammed with locals, pushing and shoving to get a glimpse of the two heroic boys. Beer spilt, and people jostled while fingers were pointed at the clever lads. Everyone was merry, and the hubbub was deafening. Splidge and Snotty sat on the bar where everyone could see them, their short legs dangling over the side. The orange mop creature climbed up onto Splidge's shoulder, not wanting to be left out. Mary Drake, the landlady, struggled to keep up with the demand for drinks.
"Go on, boys, have a pint of Tubby's special brew. I think you deserve it."
"Oh no, I'm sticking to lemonade if you don't mind," Splidge replied. "I tried that beer last night and it nearly blew me brains out."
"You can have a flagon of Baron's bitter if you'd rather,"
Mary laughed, and there was a loud booing at the mention of the Baron's name.
"It's bilge water!"
a voice shouted from the back.
"He gets it from the moat!"
yelled another.
"Tubby's has much more flavour,"
came a third. A cheer erupted, followed by a barrage of excited voices. Splidge gazed at the crowd and wondered if the whole city was crammed into that tiny tavern. They all wanted to shake his and Snotty's hand. It wasn't every day that a couple of 12-year-olds saved the royal household from burning to the ground, so there was much cause for celebration. The beer Tubby had brewed for the Cragflinger's welcome feast had not all been consumed the night before, and he was only too happy to offer it to his thirsty customers. Guzzling the potent ale at the bar were the Cragflingers, including Clonk, the effeminate one, Hades and his fabulous tan, and the pimply fat boy, Blimp. They especially wanted to show their appreciation for the lad's great bravery.
"Well done, Splidge. You and your friend have saved our lives,"
Clonk called out.
"It was our own stupid fault, really. We all had rather too much of that excellent brew and were zonked out in seconds."
No, the Baron spiked the beer with rat poison," Splidge protested. The Cragflingers laughed, raised their tankards and called for more beer. "I don't think they believe you, Splidge," said Snotty. "Yeah, but we all heard the Baron admit it at the table. He drugged the beer so he could set fire to the palace without anyone stopping him. If I hadn't drunk that coffee—" Hades touched the boy on the arm. "We all owe you a debt of gratitude, son, but I think you must be mistaken about the Baron. Isn't he next in line to the throne? The last thing he would want to do is burn the palace deliberately." Splidge screwed up his face. "But that's exactly what he did do."
"Oh, Splidge," interrupted Clonk.
"We love you dearly. You are our hero, but you don't want to be bigging yourself up too much. It's not becoming. Anyway, it's probably your friend's fault," said the pimply fat boy. Snotty scowled at Blimp. "What you mean? You were skulking about in the roof, playing with candles. You might have dropped one when we fell asleep." "What? I never did." "I'm not saying you did it on purpose, but accidents do happen." Snotty jumped off the bar and started to bare his fists. "If you're implying I started the fire, I'll punch your lights out." Splidge quickly stepped between his friend and the fat boy. "There's no need for that. It wasn't Snotty who started it. It was Baron Frogmorton. I saw him. You don't know because you were asleep." The room suddenly went quiet, and everyone turned their attention to a man who had just entered. Splidge couldn't see who it was until the crowd moved aside and let the newcomer approach the bar. "Good afternoon, young man. Am I the topic of discussion at this gathering?" the Baron said, with chilling self-assuredness. Splidge was horrified to see the evil man, who only hours earlier had tried to kill him. The Baron continued to draw closer to the boy. "Did I hear you correctly? Are you accusing me of deliberately setting fire to the palace? Is that what you said, young man?" Splidge swallowed, his feet glued to the floor. "Crag got your tongue, boy?" The Baron moved closer still, and his vile breath was overpowering. "I saw you," Splidge stammered. Everyone in the room gasped at the audacity of the lad, and they dreaded the Baron's reaction. But unexpectedly, the brewer started to laugh. "What an utterly ridiculous idea. Why in God's name would I want to burn down the home of my dearly beloved brother, our gracious king? You really have a vivid imagination. I popped in to say a personal thank you for saving the palace from ruin." "But I saw you do it," Splidge said more confidently. "How you do like to spin a yarn. It was impossible for me to start the fire, as you and your fellow Cragflingers know. I had already left, if you remember. But yes, I did return." Splidge seized on this. "See, I told you he did it." "Oh, you silly boy. Of course I came back. You and your friends were far too drunk on the rat poison the landlord of this pub had brewed for you. You were all incapable of doing your duty." "What do you mean?" "What I mean is, I think you should be thanking me, not making wild accusations." "Thanking you? For what?" "Isn't it obvious? Someone had to rescue the king." There was a sharp intake of breath, and the crowd started to applaud the Baron.
"3 cheers for the Baron, for saving the king! Hip hip, hooray!"
Although no one particularly liked the cadaverous man or his chilling presence, they were grateful for his courageous deed. The Baron was praised and slapped on the back by many of the Cragflingers, and even a flagon of Tubby's ale was thrust into his hand. Soon the whole room erupted in a cacophony of delightful cries of joy. Splidge, Snotty and the Crag couldn't bear to stay any longer, and sulked off. The party in the Hog and Bucket continued for many hours. The Baron didn't stay too long, but he did manage to sidle up to the tavern's landlord before he left. "I've been looking for you," the Baron said. "Have you been avoiding me?" Tubby found himself pinned to the door leading down to the cellar.
No, of course not. It's been full on, Baron, as you can see."
"The Royal Gud told me that he granted you permission to brew this undrinkable moonshine."
Yes, I was given a temporary licence."
"I also hear the idea wasn't exactly his to begin with, and that the suggestion came from elsewhere." The Baron clasped the landlord's wrist and started to twist. Tubby's eyes began to water.
"Hey, Baron, old chum, you can't hog Tubby all to yourself."
Clonk was calling from the other side of the bar, waving his tankard.
"We need him to change the barrel. This excellent beer is running out, and we want more."
The Baron relaxed his grip and thrust his face close to his captive. "We shall talk more about this soon, Mr. Drake." And slithering through the merry crowd, the Baron slipped out of the door. After lunch, King Guddamac stood in the palace courtyard and watched while the boisterous, inebriated Cragflingers traipsed drunkenly over the drawbridge. There was still 2 weeks until the royal tournament, and they all needed to go home to get back to their training regimes. The king thanked the competitors for coming to the welcome feast and paying the deposit to take part in the games. After the last of the carriages had left, all King Guddamac wanted to do was rest his weary head and soak in a nice hot bath. Earlier that day, when King Guddamac returned from his night in the rubbish skip, Perch had rushed out to greet the royal Gud and broke the awful news about the fire. In disbelief, the king lumbered up the 3rd floor, helped by Groggins, Gob and Perch. They guided his bulk to the charred remains of the throne room. The king was shocked by the devastation. The smell of burnt food, charred wood and scorched plaster filled the air. There was little left of the banqueting table. The roof had a gaping hole in it, and the royal throne was tipped on its side. Groggins and Perch hastily righted the regal chair, and King Guddamac sat down, placing his head in his hands. He was distraught. The repairs would cost a fortune. How could he afford the restorations and stage the royal tournament? Groggins' voice penetrated his dismay.
"What I don't understand, your royal Guddiness, is why the Baron dumped you at the fun fair." "Giles has a peculiar sense of humour," replied the king. "He wants to buy the land it sits on."
Groggins looked shocked.
"You're not going to sell it to him, are you, your royal Guddiness?"
The king reached into his pocket and produced a scrap of paper. Written on it was a substantial sum of money. He handed it to the royal butler, who raised an eyebrow. Then Groggins passed it to Perch.
"As you can see, he is offering a very good price," sighed the king. "I may not have a choice."
Splidge was pacing up and down in the kitchen garden. He was supposed to be practising his crag-flinging skills, but his mind was elsewhere, and he was annoyed. The orange crag was trotting behind him, careful not to be trodden on as the boy spun round to retrace his footsteps.
"I don't understand," Splidge said. "Why won't they believe me?" "Are you certain they weren't trying to put out the fire?"
squeaked the crag.
"Oh, don't you start. It's not just the Cragflingers who doubt me. Even the king thinks I was sloshed and imagined the whole thing. But Snotty saw it, and he didn't have any of the spiked beer."
The crag climbed up onto the target wall to be at eye level with his master.
"But I thought you said Snotty came back after the fire got going."
"Well, yes, he did."
"So did he see the Baron start it?"
"No, but he did see him cover me with that fire water, and he saved me from being torched alive." Splidge kicked the wall. "I don't get it. I saved the palace from complete ruin, and yet somehow it feels like it's my fault."
"What you need is proof,"
the crag said. "Yeah, and where am I going to get that from?" The man disappeared into the brown liquid for the umpteenth time. He was being pushed under by a long pole. Flailing around in a mixture of hops and yeast, the worker was desperate not to drown. Pigface was on a platform looking down into the fermenting vessel. He thrust the malt paddle into the employee's chest and grinned as the fella submerged below the scummy surface. The Baron watched the poor wretch wallowing in the beer. When the half-dead worker resurfaced, the Baron raised a hand to halt proceedings. "Had enough yet?" The man barely had the strength to answer, but made a grunt. "I will not tolerate thieves in my brewery," continued the Baron. "This is a lesson from which I hope you shall take heed. The next time you steal from me, your punishment will be far worse. Do I make myself clear?" Struggling to breathe, the employee nodded. The Baron eyed the exhausted worker with suspicion. "What were you going to do with that silver alarm clock you removed from my office?" Choking on the bubbling ale, the man confessed he was going to sell the clock to buy bread and vegetables to feed his starving family. "Are you insinuating I do not pay you enough?" the Baron said, his pale skin tightening around his face. The man stared sorrowfully back at his employer. The Baron was unimpressed and snapped his fingers. Pigface took his cue and with a menacing smirk rammed the blunt implement into the worker, forcing him down once more. The employee gurgled horribly. As Pigface released his grip, the Baron snatched the long pole and jabbed the worker back down and held him under until he stopped thrashing. "You've killed him, Baron," said Pigface, with unusual concern. "No one steals from me," replied the ice-cold brewery owner.
"Baron! Baron!"
a voice called, and the Baron spun round. The henchman with the greasy-haired ponytail was rushing across the brewery.
"Baron! The Royal Guard is here!"
The Baron flashed a look towards the main entrance and saw the royal coach pulling up outside. He flung the malt paddle at Pigface. "Impeccable timing," he said under his breath. Glancing at the lifeless form floating in the tank, he shrugged, and the slither of a smile crept onto his lips. "Get this cleaned up, Brute, and dump the body." Pigface nodded as the Baron stalked off towards his office. The King poured himself a cup of coffee while he waited in the Baron's office. He decided not to sit on the ridiculously small chair provided and crossed over to the window to peer into the main brewery below. He watched a man being pulled from a large cylindrical tank. The poor fellow must have accidentally fallen in. It was one of the many hazards of working in such a large industrial plant. The King knew the Baron was fixed on his idea of expansion. Large factories manufacture things more cheaply, but at what price to people's health or well-being? The office door opened, and the Baron stalked in. The two men eyed one another for a moment. "Have you come to sell the funfair to me, brother?" the Baron said, without preamble.
"No,"
the King replied.
"I've come to thank you for saving my life."
"Oh, it was nothing. You are my brother."
"Half-brother,"
corrected the King. "I couldn't let you go up in smoke with the rest of the building." The Baron positioned himself behind his half-moon desk and sat back in his luxurious leather chair. "Do sit down. You make the place feel cramped."
"You dumped me in a rubbish skip,"
exclaimed the King, remaining on his feet. "I'm sorry about that, but I thought you would see the funny side." The Baron leant forward. "So, what about the land? The money I offer shall pay for the repairs to the throne room."
"I've told you, Giles, it's not for sale."
Baron Throgmorton pushed a roll of paper across the desk. "It is the blueprints for my new factory." The Baron stood up. "Look, dear brother, let's join forces, bulldoze the funfair and move into a new era. Go on, take a look at it. It may surprise you. It is revolutionary, and we could make millions together, you and I." The King slid the plans away and scoffed.
"I have no wish to look at your plans."
"You are missing out on progress, brother. Machines can be built that run around the clock. They never have to stop, and they can replace the need for workers."
"Giles, it is abhorrent. Can't you see where this will lead? A nation of out-of-work people would mean greater numbers of poor, starving and displaced souls. They would be destitute and dependent on help from the state."
"Ignore them, brother. Care not about the weak and feeble. They shall die soon enough. I don't need them." The King stared at the animated, tall, thin man. The Baron was mad and his ideas dangerous.
"Giles, this is nonsense. Of course you need them. If your newfangled manufacturing processes were to go ahead and people were replaced with machines, how could anyone afford to buy the stuff you churn out? You'd be shooting yourself in the foot."
The Baron fumed, and he stared at his oversized brother.
Make no mistake, you shall sell that land to me, and my plans will go ahead. Now get that disgraceful mountain of fat out of my office, and go back to your pathetic, crumbling palace and your silly crag-flinging games." The king shook his head, and left his unhinged relation to stew in his office. He had never seen him quite so demented. When the king had gone, Pigface was called to the office. "Any news of the girl?" the Baron asked, in a low tone. "No one has seen her, Baron." "Damn it. I thought she had grown out of this nonsense." "Do you think she's run away again?" "Yes, Brute, I do." The Baron closed the door so they could not be overheard. "I checked her room last night. She never returned and must have been out all night." "Do you want me to organise a search party? We can flush her out." "No. She never forgave me the last time. My daughter is older now. I thought she would see things my way, but regrettably she seems hell-bent on rebelling." "She's just a teenager, Baron. She'll come round." "Yes, she is a teenager, 16 and full of herself." The Baron stroked his chin. The temperature in the room seemed to have dropped. The tall, thin man became deadly serious, and his voice had an icy chill. "She has gone too far this time. And so I have come to a decision. I have a small job for you." There was sheer evil in the Baron's eyes. "Brute, I do want you to find her. But no search party, just you, and be discreet. And when you find her, I want you to make sure she will never make it to 17. The Baron returned to his desk and sat down. Pigface paused at the door, the words still hanging in the air. Giles Throgmorton snapped his head upwards and glanced at his servant. "Brute, do you have a problem with that?" Pigface shook his head. "No, Baron.